Hello everyone, welcome to a new video. Today we're going to be talking about all the books that I read in April. I read a total of 6 books, 5 physical and 1 on my Kindle. So that's a little bit different, having read a lot more physical books than Kindle books, but it's great. I'm loving getting back into my physical books era. My battery is about to die and I have to switch that out. I'll be right back. Okay, I think we're good to go. So we're just gonna get started right away and go through the books. No time for just yapping about random things. But anyway, the first book that I completed was Every Home a Foundation by Phylicia Masonheimer, Experiencing God Through Your Everyday Routines. And I love this book. I don't remember if I actually gave it a star rating. Probably give it 4 or even 5 stars. I just thought it was a very inspiring and beautiful book about the importance of the work we do here at home if you are a stay-at-home mom. But also it's practical for even the ones who do work out of the home, because she just goes through and shows the importance of it, that it's not just like the work you do at home isn't the lesser work, or the less important work, I should say. I'm gonna read this little flap on the dust jacket because I think it summarizes the book a lot better than what I can do. The quote at the top says, "Home matters to God. It is the center of true discipleship." Sorry if the dishwasher is loud and obnoxious in the background. Anyway. Home can be many things: a place of overwhelm, a place of isolation, a place of welcome, and a place of community. It all depends on how you look at it. The truth is that our everyday tasks, folding laundry, cleaning dishes, cooking food, inviting people over, scrubbing floors, glorify God. Once we have an understanding of God's purpose and heart for what the home can be, it's easier to take heart in our to-do lists. Phylicia Masonheimer guides you to understand that whether you're single, married, parenting littles, or seeing your littles off to college, your home will be a haven if it is based on the goodness of God. Through personal experience, stories, and plenty of practical tips, Masonheimer unveils how to find contentment with the home you have, take pleasure in the toil of home, believing that your work is seen, valuable, and restorative, create rhythms in your household that will contribute to a culture-wide Christian legacy, and unpack the difference between entertaining and hospitality. Every Home a Foundation shows that there is hope for joy in joyless tasks, hope for goodness in boring places, hope for a life well lived in the unseen moments. And as someone who is a homebody, who loves to be at home, and I have found so much joy in being a stay-at-home mom and wife and taking care of the home, because it's all I ever wanted to do. Not all, but it is one of the bigger dreams that I've ever had, that I had to become a wife and a mom and take care of a home. And I've been inspired by other women in my life and homes that I've been to where they've created these atmospheres of peace and joy, and these homes weren't the perfect spick and span homes. They were the homes that were lived in, that were just like comforting and a joy to go to their houses. And I feel like my mom did an excellent job with that as well. Like, we had a small home growing up, but that never stopped her from having people over. And I remember growing up, people loved coming to our house, but our house wasn't perfect. It was very crammed and small. If our table was extended and we had lots of guests over, we couldn't even necessarily walk from one room into the other. We had to go the whole long way around in the hall. It was very full and crowded, but I remember people loving coming to our house and enjoying it. And yeah, even with the crammed corners, the stained carpet, the old linoleum from the early 1900s floor in our kitchen, like things like that were things that we would have noticed living at the house and being like, oof, it's not as nice as other people's houses. But the point is that people felt welcomed and loved in the home. And so all that to say, I've always been inspired to create the same home myself. And so I've loved doing that, taking care of a home. But this book even more so brought out the importance of that. Yeah, discipleship starts in the home, and that we can create lived in beautiful spaces. They don't have to be perfect. So she goes through that as well, of the difference between hospitality and entertaining as well. But I don't know, it just inspired me even more so in that way. But I also feel like it would be practical advice for people who do have a hard time in seeing the joys of the daily routines, because the work we do at the house, at the home, is very repetitive. And it's like you wash the dishes and a couple hours later there are more dishes to wash. You sweep the floors and a couple hours later there's dirt on the floors again that you just cleaned. And it's like, what's the point? Sometimes we can feel like, what's the point? We just have to keep doing it over and over again. Isn't that the same thing with the other jobs outside of the home though? You're basically doing the same thing over and over. Why do we feel the home is, why do we disdain the routines of the home? You have to file the same papers over and over again in an office job. I'm just having a revelation. I don't know, like there's something about the culture that we live in that is kind of like demeaned the work in the home and saying it's not important, and that this book kind of addresses that. I don't know, there's so much goodness and truth in this book, and I would highly recommend it to anyone. She gives very practical advice about how to create rhythms and routines in the house, and just different ways to stay on top of your work so it doesn't get overwhelming and where you feel like you're completely lost in the chaos of trying to keep your house cleaned up and your laundry washed and folded, but also showing how all of those tasks can point to God and his goodness. Here we go. I have many tabs in this book, and it's something that I want to come back to a lot, especially when there are days that it feels overwhelming with everything that I need to be doing. I'm going to show you or read just a few of these quotes that I've highlighted because they're just so good. A home can be built with the sparest materials as long as the heart behind it is unified with God's mission. So like, especially with social media and people showing their houses and showing their nice things that they own, we can tend to be a little bit discontent with our homes if they don't have the latest and greatest trends and styles. But those things aren't important if the home is not built on love and God's goodness and the mission that God has called you to. And like, you can have those things and still have a home that is filled with God's love and goodness, and be a home with the latest and greatest. I'm not saying that's like they're at opposition, but you don't need those things to create a beautiful home and space. Speaking of discontent, this one quote says, "The twinge of contempt we feel when we see another person's lovely kitchen isn't about the kitchen, it's about discontent." A truly Christ-centered home doesn't pursue righteousness to impress others or host company to show off the house. A culture of faith is created when the hearts of those within the home are fixed on Christ himself. Out of this heart transformation, we pursue the disciplines of the spiritually strong life, not to impress or show off or prove anything to God or people, but to experience the richness of communion with God and man. Can I go on forever reading all of the good quotes and stuff? Probably. I'm just gonna say, please read this book. No matter what season of life you're in, the main message of this book is about creating a space for community and discipleship and loving the people around you, your neighbors and family, because discipleship starts in the home. Then there's also the practical side of things, of like routines and rhythms and things that she practical ways of taking care of your home are also in this book if you're feeling the overwhelm of not being able to stay on top of things, feeling like your house is always in chaos and all of that. But there's also no shame in this book for people who are in that, but she should, like, there's grace for that. And there's also obviously seasons that we go through in our life when we just aren't on top of things in our home because of life's seasons, and there's grace for that too. So like, I definitely felt like there was no shame thrown at people in this book. Instead, I found encouragement and inspiration and just like great practical wisdom for it. One of the things that I loved, as a type A person, I can very much want to like set up schedules and like follow them to the letter, and like kind of like just grit my teeth and be like, this is how we're going to do it to make things run better. And that most times ends up not working, and then I become frustrated and then just ditch the whole scheduling and routines and stuff. But one of the most like mind-blowing things, like, or it was just like a huge revelation to me, which I should have thought of this before, but you know, that's why we need other people and other believers in our lives to like shed some light on things. She explains it much better than I just did, because I feel like that's not even all that mind-blowing, because maybe some people already do that, but I didn't. It says to create a weekly plan. I'm steering away from the word schedule. It is very important that you not hold yourself to an hourly schedule. If you make a daily routine based on rising at 6:30, but you sleep through your alarm or your baby wakes up raring to go at 6, your whole routine gets down the tube. Instead, abide by the rhythmic routine, following the same order, not the same hours. And I was just like, pfft. I'm sure many people have done this for a long time, but for me, I'm always just like, oh, you should get up at this time so you can get started and get going. And if I plan to do that and it doesn't work out, and I'm already behind in my hours of what I should have been getting done by 10 already, I feel the stress and overwhelm. And I just love this idea of like, take a step back, breathe. It's fine. Work in rhythms and routines and following the same order of your day. So like, even if you end up waking up at 8 instead of 6, do the same plan. Whatever it is, I don't know. It's just like, that's how practical this is. And that's why I loved it so much. But again, I'm gonna refer back to this book so many times when I'm needing inspiration or encouragement, or needing to be reminded of the beauty of creating a home that glorifies God, that shows his love to everyone who walks in the door, and especially to the people who live in this home. So anyway, highly recommend. Then next, this is very random, but I picked up Lost Towns of North Georgia. So I kind of started this thing where if Eden will go to the bookshelf, she loves to look at all of my books that I have on the shelves, and I do try to keep an eye on her when she's with the books. So far she hasn't torn too many. I think there's only been like 1 or 2 books that she's actually torn a page or so. It was an easy quick fix, but anyway, she started pulling some books off the shelf, and I'm just like, that should be your motivation to read that book. If she pulls it off, you need to read it. If I haven't read that book yet, by the way. But this is one that she pulled off one day, and I just picked it up and started reading it, and I could not put it down because it was so fascinating. I absolutely love history, and I learned so many things about Georgia, especially in North Georgia. Most of these towns were set in North Georgia. That history of my home state that I did not know about, and I just found it absolutely fascinating. It's just about some old towns that no longer exist, that were either burned down, like when Sherman came through during the Civil War, and then other towns that were just abandoned, other towns that were flooded because of lakes being built and dams being built, and just the history of those towns, the history of North Georgia. I don't know, I found it absolutely fascinating. If you are native to Georgia and don't know about this part of our history, I would recommend reading it. If you just love random facts and random tidbits about history, I would recommend it. It's got pictures. It's very much just an information book, but it was so fascinating, I thought. So that was fun. Then next, I read Mammoth by Brian McBride. This is on Kindle Unlimited, and I mentioned in a vlog, my last vlog, that I have thoughts about this series. I was reading the second book in that vlog, but I'm going to share my thoughts here and now. So this series follows a group of about 5 friends, and think like Indiana Jones, Hardy Boys, and Outer Banks, like that type of thing, where they're solving mysteries and they're going on treasure hunts. But this one is focused more on finding lost artifacts or fossils, and all of that, and all the danger and intrigue of people who are trying to find these valuable pieces. And it's very exciting. It's full of adventure and danger. It is very fascinating. But here's the beef that I had with it, if I can call it that. I watched the show Outer Banks back when it was released years ago, and I really enjoyed the show for the most part, like the action and adventure of finding the lost treasure and the friendships and found family aspects. So like these books, by the way, if that is a buzzword for you, these books definitely have found family. But anyway, I loved the show Outer Banks. I don't love the language, and I don't love some of the other aspects. I don't love all the aspects about the show, but the adventure and the friendship dynamics, found family, treasure hunting, loved that stuff. But yeah, so when I picked up this book and saw that he was inspired by Outer Banks, but this was advertised as a cleaner version of Outer Banks, I was like, great, this is awesome. I loved Outer Banks, and I love this adventure, and I love the excitement of it all. And so I started reading this book, and it felt like I was just watching a complete rewrite of Outer Banks. If I wouldn't have watched Outer Banks at all, I would not have thought of it at all. So like, this is just a personal thing I have. I don't know, when does something come like plagiarism? Not plagiarism, but like stealing ideas from other people and writing them into your books? Because I know that there's so many retellings of stories that don't have an issue, but this is not advertised as a retelling. It's like just more inspired by, I don't know if I'm going to say this in the correct way. I read several reviews of the book too, and there were a lot of people who were very frustrated that it felt just like he stole the whole idea from Outer Banks and put it into a book, but just changed a few things, because it's not about finding treasure, it's more about finding fossils, but just the dynamics of everything felt like I was reading a word for word script of Outer Banks in a sense, and with few things changed. I don't know how to, I don't know why it bothers me so much, because like I said, there are lots of retellings of stories and things like that out there, and it's not considered plagiarism or stealing like the creative ideas of the people who wrote the show Outer Banks. Like, okay, like in this specific situation, is it considered stealing the ideas of the writer of Outer Banks show? Because the friend group is almost exactly like, it felt like he took the exact personalities of the characters of the show and put them into book form, and it's exactly like Outer Banks. So like, you have Tommy in the book, who is pretty much identical in personality and life story to John B. Rutledge on Outer Banks, and then Lydia, who is supposed to be the one who's like representing Sarah, her life story is almost identical, and personality, everything is almost identical to Sarah in Outer Banks, except a few things were changed. Jude, which is supposed to be like JJ, his life story, personality, everything is almost identical, and so on and so forth. Like with Mars is supposed to be like, can't remember his name on Outer Banks, and then Maya, who is supposed to be like, I can't remember, oh, I can't remember the last two names. Either way, the characters' personalities and the friendship dynamics are exactly like the group of 5 friends. And then there's another girl that shows up in Outer Banks later on who joins their group, and there's also in the second book a girl that joins their group with almost the same storyline in a way and personality that matches the group of 5 friends. And like, that's where it felt like he just took from them and put it in his story and made it, tried to make it his own. And I don't know, like, this is no shade or hate on the author specifically, but in my mind I'm just like, you could have still taken inspiration from the story and did all the treasure hunting and things, but taking the exact characters, personalities, and family storylines and placing them into your book, it feels like stealing creative ideas. And you can tell me I'm wrong in this, but it literally felt like I was just reading a rewrite of Outer Banks and the characters. Like, I kept picturing the characters of Outer Banks in this story. But if we put all of that aside, and if I would not have watched Outer Banks and I would have picked up this book and just read it on its own, then I think I would have given it at least 4 stars, because it is very full of adventure, intrigue, mystery, solving puzzles, finding clues. I don't know, it's everything that I love in adventure stories. And it's also, there are mentions of like violence and murders and drugs, things like that, but it's all portrayed in a way that doesn't glorify those things. It shows them and they're wrong, and they're also not ever graphic or anything. So if you love adventure stories, but you want, and if you loved Outer Banks, those types of adventure stories without all of the gross glorifying of slicking around and drugs and things like that, partying, then these books would be great for you. That's the thing. I do still recommend these books because they are clean. They're excellent adventure stories. And I did just finish the second book, which I will talk about that in my wrap up for May. I enjoyed the second book a lot more because it felt like it was more of its own story and not just a rerun of Outer Banks. And so like the characters are the same, but they felt more developed and felt like more of their own characters, and I didn't keep thinking about the Outer Banks characters as much in the second book, but like this first one I definitely did a lot. But yeah, I don't know, let me know your thoughts about those types of things, because I don't know if I'm just like being a little bit unfair with the way he wrote this book, but I love these books for the fact that they are clean, they're adventure stories, and we need more good, clean adventure stories out there with Christian elements. It's not heavy on the faith content, but it does seem like some of the characters at least have a relationship with God and are Christians, but it's more just under the radar, and like those things are kind of mentioned here and there. It's definitely more focused on the friendship dynamics, found family, finding the lost treasures or fossils, and just adventure. But yeah, I only gave Mammoth 3 stars, I think, just because of just how I struggled with the way that he set up the story and the town. One other huge thing was that I know that there are many books with the theme of the different class systems and their animosity towards each other, like the rich and the poor and all of that, but the setup of Mammoth, the town of Mammoth, is again almost identical to Outer Banks, with the Pogues versus the Kooks and the Pogues. And so in Mammoth book you have the jailbirds, which would be similar to the Pogues. So like they're the misfits, the outcasts, the poor. They live in the poorer section of town, versus the, I can't remember the name that he used for the richer end of town, the ones who live on the wall. I don't know. So like that whole premise felt like, again, identical to the Outer Banks. And Outer Banks is probably not original with that idea either, of the 2 different classes of people who live in a certain area who have like a lot of confrontation and whatever. Okay, it's the Israelites and the Samaritans, same thing there. But I don't know, again, maybe I'm just being a little too harsh, because I haven't written a book. If I ever write a book, it will probably be very hard to not include specific ideas that other authors have used in their books, and tropes and storylines and characters. But it just felt too identical in my opinion. Oh man. Because like, you didn't have to set up the friend group exactly like the friend group in Outer Banks. Like, you could have used different genders and characters, and I don't know. You can tell me I'm wrong, but those were my honest thoughts. Otherwise, I would recommend the book if you want fun adventure. So we're gonna be done talking about it now. I will continue the series, and like I said, I really enjoyed the second one, and it ends kind of on a cliffhanger, and so I definitely want to keep reading the rest of the series. But anyway, there we go. Moving on. Yes. This was, oh come on, much more fun for me. Amanda Dykes, Yours is the Night. This was a book that I mentioned in one of my recent vlogs as well. It's part of the 25 in 2025 books that my sister picked out for me to read this year, and I haven't read. I had said in that vlog that I hadn't read any books yet from that list, but I actually had read one book. I don't remember which one it was, but I did read one. So this was the second one out of my 25 in 2025 books that I read, and wow. I had not read any of Amanda Dykes' books yet before I picked this one up, so I was a little unsure about her writing style and if it was something that I could love. It took me a bit to get into the book, especially the first couple chapters. If it was switching between several different characters every chapter, and I was trying to keep track of them and their stories in the beginning, so it was a little confusing. But the further I got into the book and the more time I spent in the book with the writing style and the characters, the more I fell in love with the story and the characters. It's so beautiful. I ended up rating it 5 stars. It is set during the First World War. Yes, I'm just gonna read the back again. It explains it a lot better. The trenches of the Great War are a shadowed place. Though Platoon Sergeant Matthew Pettigrew arrived there with a past long marked by shadow, the realities of battle bring new wounds, carving within him a longing for light and a resolve to fight for it. One night, Matthew and his comrades are enraptured by a sound so pure, a voice so ethereal, it offers reprieve, even if only for a moment. Soon, rumors sweep the trenches from others who have heard the lullaby too. The angel of Argonne, they call the voice, a mysterious presence who leaves behind wreaths on unmarked graves. Raised in the wild depths of the forest of Argonne, Mireille, I don't do well with the French accent and French names, but anyway, the girl finds her reclusive world rocked when war crashes into her idyllic home, taking much from her. When Matthew and his 2 unlikely companions discover Mireille, they must embark on a journey that will change each of them forever, and perhaps at long last spark light into the dark. It was just an absolutely beautiful story. And I don't know if Amanda Dykes' writing style, with her very poetic words and just the flow of the sentence structures and the storytelling, is for everyone, but I do highly recommend this story. It's so beautiful. It will tug at your heartstrings. It brought tears to my eyes on several occasions, and I loved it. 5 stars, highly recommend. And now I know that I love her writing. I definitely want to pick up more of her books and own them, have them on my shelf. Anyway, the next book then that I finished in April was The Techwise Family by Andy Crouch. Everyday Steps for Putting Technology in its Proper Place. I picked this book up because it was the book that the book club I was invited to join when I moved here. This is the book they were reading. And it's a very quick, short little book, but it does give lots of practical advice about keeping technology in its proper place in this day and age where it's really hard to avoid technology, but it gives practical advice to not let the technology control us and consume us, but to just, yeah, it gives practical advice for those things. I did feel honestly that sometimes it felt a little idealistic and unrealistic with some of the rules he set up, but at the same time, at the end of the chapters, he always gave a reality check about his family and how they do have these rules, but they didn't always follow them to the letter, and so that was helpful. It wasn't like he was putting himself on a high pedestal of like, we do this perfectly and do this right and keep technology in a proper place all the time in our home. But he gave very practical realities about how they didn't always follow the rules letter for letter. But it was very inspiring and challenging, because I had already kind of been thinking about how I want to spend less time on my phone, especially around Eden. I also don't want to always use a screen to entertain her, even though it's very easy to do that sometimes. But yeah, I don't know. It's a very practical book. I don't know that I would fully agree with all of his assessments and rules, because you have to make what works for your family work for your family, not try to do what everyone else is doing if it doesn't work for your family, if that makes sense. But it was interesting, and there are some good practical tips in here. But yeah, anyway, there's that one. And then the final book that I read in April was Mine is the Night by Liz Curtis Higgs. I did not even mean to do this, but I just found it very ironic that I read a book that was titled Yours is the Night and then picked up a book called Mine is the Night. Anyway, this book is book number 2 for a duology. The first one is Here Burns My Candle. I read the Here Burns My Candle several months ago. I don't own that book anymore. That is the one book that is one of the books that Eden tore, and I didn't enjoy that book all that much. So I didn't really care, and I tossed the book out because I was like, I'm not ever going to read it again. I didn't enjoy it. She tore it. It doesn't need to stay on my shelf. And so I was really dreading picking up this book, because it felt like every book that I've ever picked up by Liz Curtis Higgs, I just never fully enjoyed or didn't love the storyline, the content, in the sense that I kind of wrestled with how one of the books that I'm talking about are the series Thorn in My Heart, Fair as the Rose. That's kind of like a biblical retelling of Jacob's story, of him marrying, like in the Bible, Jacob would have married Leah first because of Laban's deception, and then he married Rachel later, so he would have ended up with 2 wives. And so she wrote that story kind of retelling Jacob's story, but in more like modern day, but not modern day because it's set in the early 1800s. I don't know for sure the timeline, but I'm like, how are you supposed to make that work where you're not committing adultery with having married 2 women in whatever? That's just my impression of the books. It's been a really long time that since I read those books, and so I should maybe read them again and see if I can understand the storyline a little bit better and how she actually set it up and made it work where he was married to the 2 women. It was weird to me. And so every book that I've picked up since then, like Here Burns My Candle, I was just like, man, it just felt kind of boring. I didn't love the first one because it was just really sad and heavy, because the Elizabeth, her husband, was like unfaithful to her and always portrayed in a sense like he kept coming back and saying sorry and would you forgive me, and she forgives him, but he still kept living in that life, so he wasn't actually living in repentance and turning away from living that kind of life. This story, I should say this first, is that it's kind of based off of the story of Ruth in the Bible. And so in the first book, if you know the story of Ruth, you know that Elizabeth's husband ends up dying, and so she and her mother-in-law end up going back to her mother-in-law's hometown because they both lost their husbands. Her sister-in-law ended up going back to her own family, so very similar to the story of Ruth. And in the first book, we see Elizabeth's journey to faith in Christ, because she was from the Highlands, and so she would have been more like believed a bit more like a pagan would, I guess, believe it, like worshiping the moon, praying to the moon, things like that. But she comes to faith in Christ in the first book, and so like I love that aspect of the story. But overall the book just felt heavy and dark, and I didn't enjoy it. And so I was just like, I'm probably not going to enjoy this book, but I need to read the second one and give her one more shot, one more chance for me to love her books, or at least one of her books. And this one did it for me. I loved this story. So this one opens up with Elizabeth and her mother-in-law Marjorie going back to Marjorie's hometown after they lost everything. So Marjorie's sons would have been involved in the Jacobite rebellion against the King of England, and so because of that she lost her land and title and wealth, everything, because it was considered treason. And so she lost everything, but she and Elizabeth chooses to stay with her because Elizabeth's own home life was hard and it wasn't safe for her to go back. So it follows their story, very similar to the story of Ruth, going back to their hometown and finding ways to support her mom-in-law Marjorie. And then there's someone who comes into the town, or yeah, she starts working for a rich man, and again it follows the story of Ruth, so very similar ways of them falling in love and then all of that. So that romance is in the story as well. But this book is very long, and with how little I enjoyed the first book, Here Burns My Candle, I was like, this is going to be such a long and boring book. But when I picked this book up, I could not put it down. And within what felt like no time at all, I had read 100 pages already, and I was so invested. The whole time throughout this whole book, I was so invested in the story, with the writing, with the setting of the story in the Scottish Highlands. And I don't know what it is about this book in particular that I just absolutely loved, but I'm very grateful to have found at least one book by Liz Crose Higgs that works for me, that I love and enjoy. And I'm definitely keeping this one on my shelf because I would probably reread it sometime, because it was just that good and that beautiful. And I don't know why I have such an issue with some of her other books, but this one worked for me and I would recommend it. I don't think you really need to even read Here Burns My Candle to read this one, because it does mention a little bit of the backstories in this book. So you could definitely just read this one without reading the first one, because that first one was very heavy, like I said, with the adultery and just all the dying that happened with their husbands, and I don't know. So I would recommend this one, and you do not need to pick up the first one to read it. This one, I feel like, shares their story and looks into the past a little bit of what they went through very well, so that you're not like you haven't lost any pieces to the story, is what I'm trying to say. But I rated this one 4 stars, 4.5 stars, probably 5 stars, because I enjoyed it. I don't remember exactly what my Goodreads rating was, but this was a good time. I read through it so quickly. It is over 400 pages, 442 I think, but I read it so fast because the story, the line, it just like flowed, and it never felt like it was any place in the story for me personally was boring and was like I had to push through to keep going. No, I was invested the entire time. I loved the characters, the story of Marjorie and her she has a love story in here as well, and all of the other side characters in this story. I loved them all. It was just a fun, great time. A beautiful historical romance story retelling of the story of Ruth. So, set in the Scottish Highlands. What more can you ask for? Anyway, I do recommend this one. Yay, we found one. But anyway, those are all the books that I read. Overall, I enjoyed all of the books that I read, with a few caveats of some issues that I had with some of the books. One book in particular. Anyway, there we go. Let me know if you're interested in any of these books, and tell me what your favorite read was in April. And yeah, that's it. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.